Welcome to the channel, my alien friends. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Enjoy listening. Aaron Winters sat hunched over his desk at Novacorp, staring blankly at the unending stream of interplanetary trade permits flickering on his screen. His fingers moved mechanically, stamping approval after approval, his mind lost in the monotony of another dreary workday. The hum of the office around him had become white noise long ago, fading into a dull, oppressive background. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Earth to Aaron," Zach's voice snapped him back to reality. Aaron blinked and looked up at his coworker, standing next to his cubicle with a grin plastered on his face. "Come on, man, lunch. You in?" "Nah," Aaron muttered. "Brought a sandwich today, gotta save up, you know?" Zach shrugged. "Suit yourself. Oh, hey, before I forget, we're doing the lottery pool again. You want to chip in?" Aaron hesitated. He had sworn off gambling after a disastrous bet last year that cost him nearly a month's rent. The sting of that mistake still lingered, but the thought of another long, mundane week gnawed at him. "You know what? Yeah, put me down for a ticket." Zach grinned. "Attaboy." Little did Aaron know that impulsive decision would change his life forever. 2 weeks later, Aaron sat in stunned silence as the lottery commissioner's voice droned on, barely registering the words. His mind reeled, trying to process what had just happened. "And lastly, Mr. Winters, in addition to the monetary prize, you've also won our special grand prize, a 1-year contract for service from 2 Xylan companions." Aaron blinked, his eyes widening. "I'm sorry, what?" The commissioner beamed, his smile too wide, too practiced. "2 Xylan maids, Mr. Winters, straight from the planet Xylos. They'll arrive next week to begin their service." Aaron's head spun. Xylan maids? Aliens? What the hell was he supposed to do with alien maids? The next week passed in a surreal blur. Aaron quit his job at Novacorp, moved into a lavish penthouse, and tried to wrap his head around the fact that he was now wealthy beyond his wildest dreams. But despite the luxury, he couldn't shake the gnawing anxiety that had taken root since that bizarre conversation with the lottery commissioner. When the day arrived for the Xylan maids to show up, Aaron paced nervously in his new living room, heart hammering in his chest. He barely had time to settle his thoughts before the soft chime of the door echoed through the apartment. He swallowed hard and opened the door. Standing before him were 2 stunningly beautiful women. No, beings. Their skin shimmered in a mesmerizing shade of deep azure, glowing faintly in the apartment's light. One had flowing pink hair that cascaded over her shoulders, while the other's locks were an intense, almost luminescent blue. Both were tall, their figures draped in sleek, form-fitting uniforms that hugged their flawless curves. "Greetings, Master Aaron," the pink-haired one said, her voice smooth and melodic. She bowed slightly. "I am Naira." "And I am Tella," the blue-haired one added, her voice softer but equally entrancing. "We are here to serve you." Aaron stared, his mouth dry, words failing him. He hadn't expected this, hadn't prepared for what it would mean to be face-to-face with 2 alien women. He had imagined something different, something more otherworldly. But standing here now, they felt unsettlingly human. Hi." Aaron managed to croak. "Come in, I guess." The 2 women glided into the apartment with an otherworldly grace, their movements so fluid it was almost hypnotic. As they walked past him, Aaron's eyes traced the elegant lines of their forms, and for a moment, he forgot to breathe. He shut the door and turned to them, trying to shake off the surreal fog clouding his mind. "So, where do you want to stay?" Naira smiled gently. "Wherever you wish, Master Aaron. We are here for your comfort." "Right." Aaron led them down the hallway, showing them to the guest rooms. As they passed, he couldn't help but notice the subtle, almost deliberate sway of their hips, the way their glowing skin caught the light. The entire situation felt unreal, like he had been thrust into some bizarre dream he couldn't quite wake from. Once the 2 were settled, Aaron retreated to the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter as if it could ground him in the midst of this surreal experience. His heart raced, the enormity of it all crashing down on him. Alien maids. What had he gotten himself into? Before he could collect himself, Tella's soft voice floated in from the doorway. "Master Aaron? Is everything all right?" Aaron jumped, spinning around to find her standing just inside the kitchen, her head tilted slightly in curiosity. She was so quiet, he hadn't even heard her approach. Yeah, I'm fine," he muttered. "Just, adjusting." Tella nodded, her expression unreadable. "Your heart rate is elevated." Aaron blinked. "You can sense that?" She smiled faintly. "Xylans have empathic abilities. We can sense strong emotions and physical responses." Great, Aaron thought. Just what I needed. Alien maids who could read his every feeling. The next few days were a whirlwind of adjustment. Naira and Tella were eerily efficient, anticipating Aaron's needs before he even voiced them. They seemed to glide through the apartment, always nearby, always watching with those intense, knowing eyes. It was unsettling at first, but over time, Aaron began to grow used to their presence, though the tension never fully left. One morning, Aaron stumbled into the kitchen, bleary-eyed and desperate for coffee. Naira stood at the counter, her back to him, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. The sight of her, the way her uniform hugged her curves, caught him off guard. Naira turned, smiling warmly. "Good morning, Master Aaron. I sensed you were about to wake, so I started your coffee." Aaron swallowed, trying to force words past the dryness in his throat. Thanks." As she glided over and handed him the steaming mug, her fingers brushed his briefly, sending a jolt through his body. He could barely stammer out a response before retreating to the living room, his mind racing. That night, as Aaron lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts refused to settle. Every interaction with Naira and Tella replayed in his mind, leaving him questioning, were they simply doing their duty, or was there something more? A soft knock interrupted his restless thoughts. "Master Aaron?" Naira's voice came through the door, gentle yet insistent. "May we enter?" Confused, Aaron sat up. Sure?" The door creaked open, and both Naira and Tella stepped in. They were dressed in silky nightgowns that left very little to the imagination. Aaron's breath caught in his throat as they approached, their glowing skin casting faint light in the dim room. "We sensed your restlessness," Tella explained as they neared the bed. "On Xylos, it is customary for companions to provide comfort during sleepless nights." Before Aaron could fully comprehend what was happening, both women slipped under the covers on either side of him, their cool skin pressing gently against his. His heart pounded as Naira's soft breath tickled his ear. "Is this not agreeable?" Aaron swallowed hard. "It's different," he managed, his voice barely a whisper. Tella's hand trailed down his arm. "We can leave if you prefer." "No," Aaron said quickly, wincing at how eager he sounded. "I mean, if it's custom and all, then—" The two Xylans snuggled closer, their bodies molding to his, and Aaron lay there, paralyzed by the absurdity of it all. This had to be a dream, right? As sleep finally overtook him, Aaron realized one thing. The lottery prize he had won came with far more complications than he had ever imagined. The true cost of his fortune was just beginning to reveal itself. Aaron woke with a jolt, his heart pounding in the early morning quiet. Naira and Tella had long since slipped from his bed, leaving only the lingering chill of their presence behind. He lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, trying to shake the strange heaviness that clung to him. No matter how many times he told himself this was normal, something about it wasn't. He swung his legs out of bed, the cool floor grounding him as he rubbed his temples. The lavish penthouse around him felt more like a gilded cage than the reward he had once imagined. Each corner of the place reminded him of the surreal existence he was now tangled in, two alien maids, bound to him by some intergalactic lottery. Every time he let his mind wander back to that day, it made less and less sense. There was a weight in the air he couldn't shake, a gnawing discomfort. Maybe it was the way Naira and Tella seemed to float through his life, knowing his needs before he even voiced them. Maybe it was the fact that they could sense his emotions, could feel what he felt, and yet he couldn't read them at all. He was becoming a stranger to himself. The nagging discomfort followed him to the kitchen. As he poured himself a cup of coffee, his phone buzzed on the counter, breaking the silence. Zach's name blinked across the screen. Aaron sighed, not sure he was ready to talk to anyone from his old life, especially someone who knew nothing about this strange new reality, but he answered anyway. "Aaron," Zach's voice crackled through, way too chipper for the hour. "How's the high life, man? Swimming in credits, lounging in your penthouse?" Aaron forced a laugh. "Something like that." "Yeah, you and those alien girls, right? I saw the news, man. People are talking." Aaron's stomach twisted. "What do you mean, talking?" Zach's voice lowered conspiratorially. "You know how people get, man. There's rumors flying everywhere. Some folks think those Xylans, or whatever they're called, are manipulating the lottery winners. You know, using mind control, or telepathy, or some other weird alien stuff. You've heard about those guys, right? The ones who won before? They all went weird after their contracts ended. And now you've got two of them living in your house?" Aaron's hand tightened around the phone. He had heard the whispers but pushed them aside, chalking it up to Earth's usual xenophobia. But now, standing there in the stillness of his kitchen, the words struck a deeper chord. "Look, I'm just saying, you gotta be careful," Zach continued, his tone serious now. "Don't let him mess with your head, bro." "I'll keep that in mind," Aaron muttered, hanging up before Zach could say more. His hand hovered over the counter, trembling slightly as the paranoia began to seep in. He thought back to every interaction with Naira and Tella. The way they always seemed to know what he wanted, how they appeared at the right moment, anticipating his needs with unsettling accuracy. He remembered the way Naira's hand had brushed against his in the kitchen, how that simple touch had sent an electric jolt through his body. Was that just attraction? Or something else? As if summoned by his thoughts, Naira appeared in the doorway, her figure silhouetted against the morning light. She moved silently, her expression serene but distant, as if she hadn't heard a word of the conversation he just had. But could she? Could she feel the doubt crawling under his skin? "Is everything all right, Master Aaron?" she asked, her voice soft as ever, but the words felt like they cut through the air differently now. Aaron stared at her, heart racing. "Yeah. Just a weird morning, that's all." Naira tilted her head slightly, eyes narrowing, but said nothing. The room felt too small with her in it, like her presence was pressing down on him. He forced himself to move past her, every muscle tight with tension. That evening, Aaron sat alone in the living room, the city lights twinkling below like a distant galaxy, the soft hum of the penthouse filling the quiet. He stared into his drink, swirling the amber liquid in the glass, trying to drown the creeping doubts that had followed him all day. But it wasn't the isolation that was unnerving him. It was the constant, overwhelming feeling that he was being watched. That somewhere, in the corners of his mind, something was creeping, something he couldn't fully grasp. His phone buzzed again, the message icon flashing on the screen. Another one from Zach. "You need to get out of there, man. People are saying those aliens, they're dangerous." Aaron's blood ran cold. Were Naira and Tella dangerous? Had they been playing him this whole time, weaving their way into his life until he couldn't tell what was real and what was their influence? Or was this all just paranoia, the product of an overactive imagination and the gossip of people who didn't understand? The questions haunted him as he downed the rest of his drink, feeling the familiar warmth spread through him. But no amount of alcohol could dull the sensation crawling up his spine. From the shadows of the hallway, Aaron felt eyes on him, watching, waiting, and as Naira's soft footsteps echoed behind him, he couldn't tell whether to feel comforted or terrified. Aaron couldn't shake the feeling that something was being hidden from him. The more time he spent with Naira and Tella, the deeper his discomfort grew, like a splinter lodged beneath his skin that no amount of distraction could remove. Their beauty, their grace, it all felt too perfect, too polished. And though their smiles were warm, there was always something in their eyes, a flicker of something unspoken, like they were guarding secrets he couldn't even begin to guess. He sat on the edge of his bed one evening, staring into the darkened room, mind swirling with questions. His phone sat next to him, Zach's warnings still fresh in his mind. He had brushed off the idea of alien manipulation as earthbound paranoia, but now that seed of doubt had taken root, growing each time he looked at them. He could feel it creeping in, the sensation that Naira and Tella were always watching, waiting for something he couldn't define. Was it all just part of their service? Or was there something more sinister at play? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. "Aaron?" Tella's voice drifted through the dark. "May we come in?" Aaron hesitated, then exhaled, steadying himself. "Yeah, come in." The door opened, and the two Xylans entered, their silhouettes bathed in the pale moonlight streaming through the window. They moved with that same ethereal grace, their glowing skin casting faint light in the shadows of the room. Naira approached first, her expression soft, but Aaron couldn't help but notice the tension in her movements, the slight rigidity that hadn't been there before. "We need to talk," Aaron said before either of them could speak. His voice sounded stronger than he felt, but he pressed on. "There's something you're not telling me, isn't there? I can't ignore it anymore." The room grew still, as if the air itself had thickened with the weight of his words. Tella and Naira exchanged a look, a silent conversation that Aaron could feel, though he couldn't hear it. His heart pounded in the silence, the heavy thudding echoing in his ears. Finally, Naira stepped closer, her eyes meeting his with a gravity that sent a shiver down his spine. "There is," she admitted softly. "You're right." Aaron felt his throat tighten. He hadn't expected her to admit it so easily. His hands clenched into fists, trying to steady himself against the wave of unease rising in his chest. "Then tell me," he said, "what's really going on here?" Tella's gaze softened, a flicker of something like regret passing through her expression. She moved closer to Naira, her voice a low murmur. "Our purpose here isn't just to serve you, Aaron. Our mission goes far beyond that." Aaron's breath caught, his mind racing. He had imagined all sorts of possibilities, manipulation, deceit, even danger. But the truth, when it came, was stranger and more unsettling than anything he could have predicted. "Our home, Xylos," Naira began, her voice steady but edged with sorrow, "is dying." Aaron blinked, the words not fully registering at first. "Dying?" Tella nodded. "Centuries of war and environmental destruction have left our world on the brink of collapse. Our people, we're running out of time." Aaron's pulse quickened. He tried to process what they were telling him, but it felt like a puzzle with too many pieces missing. "What does that have to do with me?" Nira's eyes met his again, and this time there was no warmth in them, only raw, unfiltered honesty. "We can no longer reproduce." The room spun. Aaron's heart thudded against his chest as the enormity of what they were saying settled over him like a cold weight. He stared at them, speechless, trying to grasp the implications. "You're here too?" He trailed off, the words dying on his lips. "To see if we're compatible," Tella finished softly. "You were selected because your genetic markers are close to ours. You're part of an experiment, Aaron. An experiment to save our species." Aaron's mind reeled. All the strange interactions, the too perfect synchronicity, the way they seemed to know him on a level no one else ever had, it all suddenly made sense, but in a way that chilled him to the core. "And you didn't think to tell me this before?" His voice shook with disbelief, his pulse roaring in his ears. "You've been, what, using me?" "No." Naira's voice broke, and for the first time he saw something in her that felt undeniably real, pain. "It was never like that, Aaron. Then what is it?" he demanded, his frustration boiling over. "Because from where I'm standing, this sounds like manipulation. You're using me to breed, like I'm some lab rat." Tella stepped forward, her eyes pleading. "It's not just about that. It's about survival. Yes, but it's also about more. We care for you, Aaron. You have to believe that." Aaron's head spun. He backed away, overwhelmed by a surge of emotions he couldn't untangle. Betrayal, confusion, anger. He ran a hand through his hair, staring at the two of them, their luminous figures now casting long shadows on his walls. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he muttered, his voice hoarse. "I don't know what to believe." Naira stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, Aaron, let us explain. There's more at stake here than just us. We need your help, but we'll leave if you want us to. If you truly want us to go, we will." Aaron swallowed hard, his mind whirling. Everything he thought he understood had shattered in the space of a few sentences, and now he stood at the crossroads of something much larger than himself, something that could change the fate of an entire species. But at what cost? The weight of their words hung heavy in the air between them, and as Aaron met their eyes, he knew that, no matter what came next, nothing would ever be the same again. "I need time," he said, his voice barely audible, and turned away. And in the silence that followed, the shadows of Xylos stretched across his heart. The days after Naira and Tella's revelation passed in a blur for Aaron, his mind struggling to grasp the weight of their words. The truth about Xylos, their mission, and the unspoken bond they shared with him, it was too much to take in. Even now, as he sat alone in the dimly lit living room, the city lights casting long shadows across the room, Aaron felt like he was sinking beneath the weight of it all. He stared into the untouched glass of whiskey in his hand, the amber liquid reflecting his distorted image. How had his life spiraled into this? Just weeks ago, he was an ordinary man, stuck in the drudgery of a mundane job, dreaming of something, anything, more. Now he had two alien women living with him, not just as companions but as part of some intergalactic experiment to save their dying race. And the worst part? He didn't know if he could trust them. The sound of soft footsteps drew his attention. Naira appeared in the doorway, her ethereal glow muted in the low light, her expression unreadable. She moved toward him with that same graceful fluidity, the very air around her charged with an unspoken tension. "Master Aaron," she began softly, her voice hesitant. "May I join you?" Aaron didn't respond immediately. His grip tightened around the glass, the cool edge of the crystal pressing into his palm. He knew she could sense everything he was feeling, his doubt, his anger, the storm of emotions he could barely contain. Yet here she was, standing before him with that calm, almost serene look, as if she knew him better than he knew himself. "Do you even have to ask?" he muttered, bitterness creeping into his voice. Naira winced, the smallest flicker of pain crossing her face before she lowered herself into the chair across from him. Silence settled between them, thick and heavy, the weight of their unspoken words hanging in the air like a suffocating blanket. "I know you're angry with us," Naira said after a long moment, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can feel it." Aaron laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "I'm sure you can. You can feel everything, can't you? Every thought, every doubt. I can't even hide from you, can I?" Naira's gaze softened and she leaned forward, her hands resting on her knees as if she wanted to close the distance between them, but didn't dare. It's not like that, Aaron. We don't control what we sense. It's part of who we are. Part of being Xylan. Our empathic abilities aren't a weapon to use against you. They're how we connect. Connect? Aaron repeated, his voice thick with disbelief. Is that what this is? Connection? Naira's lips parted as if to respond, but she hesitated, her glowing eyes searching his face for understanding. It's more than you think, she said softly. We can feel your emotions, yes, but we don't just take, we share. Every time we feel what you feel, we offer a piece of ourselves in return. Aaron shook his head, struggling to reconcile her words with the growing sense of violation he couldn't shake. And what about me? What if I don't want that? What if I want to feel things without knowing you're in my head all the time? Naira's eyes glimmered with something like sadness, but she remained silent for a long moment, as if weighing her next words carefully. We never meant to intrude, Aaron. We hoped you would see this as something beautiful, a bond. But I can feel now that it frightens you, and I'm sorry for that. Her apology was so genuine, so raw, that it chipped away at the wall Aaron had built around himself. He wanted to be angry, wanted to keep holding on to that sense of betrayal, but he couldn't. Not with Naira sitting there, her presence soft but magnetic, pulling him towards something he couldn't yet name. You should have told me everything from the start, he said, his voice quieter now, the fire in his chest ebbing. You made me feel like this was just some arrangement, like I was the master and you were just serving me. But it's more than that, isn't it? Naira nodded slowly. It is. We're not just here to serve you, Aaron. We're here because of the connection we share. Something that goes deeper than any contract or mission. Before Aaron could respond, Tella appeared in the doorway, her gaze flicking between the two of them. Is everything all right? She asked, her voice gentle but laced with concern. Aaron glanced at her, then back at Naira. The tension in the room shifted, a subtle but palpable change, as if something invisible had settled between the three of them, weaving them together in ways Aaron couldn't yet understand. I don't know, he admitted, running a hand through his hair. I don't know what this is supposed to be. Tella stepped forward, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were afraid to break the fragile moment. You don't have to know right now, she said softly. We're not asking for answers. We're just asking you to trust us, to let this bond grow. Aaron's gaze moved between the two of them, his heart hammering in his chest. There was no denying the pull he felt toward them, the strange and undeniable connection that seemed to hum beneath the surface of every interaction. And yet, that very connection terrified him, because it wasn't just physical. It was emotional, deeply emotional, and it was real. I don't know if I can trust you, he whispered, the words heavy with the fear that had been gnawing at him for days. Naira stood, crossing the room to kneel in front of him, her glowing eyes full of sincerity. Then let us prove it to you. Let us show you that this is more than a mission, more than survival. This bond, it's real, Aaron. It's as real as anything you've ever felt. For the first time since they had entered his life, Aaron felt something shift inside him. Something that had been tightly wound finally begin to loosen. He didn't know if he could trust them fully yet, but as Naira's cool hand rested on his and Tella's gaze softened with understanding, he realized that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a betrayal. Maybe this was something else entirely. Something deeper. The bond between them wasn't just a matter of survival anymore. It was something far more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. Aaron stared out of the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, the city sprawling beneath him in a sea of glittering lights. It felt distant, as though the world outside belonged to someone else. Somewhere out there, life went on as usual. People were working, laughing, living. Meanwhile, his world had narrowed to two women, a silent choice looming over him, and the knowledge that everything he thought he knew about his life was unraveling. He hadn't spoken much to Naira and Tella since their revelation. The truth about their mission, their desperation, had sunk into him like a slow poison, twisting his thoughts until he could hardly recognize them. The bond they had, this invisible thread that tied them to him, had grown into something tangible, something he could feel deep inside. And yet, the more real it became, the more terrifying it felt. They wanted to conceive a child with him. A hybrid that could save their dying race. A child that would carry both human and Xylan DNA. A genetic bridge between two worlds. It was no longer just about them serving him. It was about creating something that could alter the course of both species. The weight of that decision pressed down on Aaron's chest like a boulder. Could he do it? Could he willingly help them create this child, knowing the consequences could be far-reaching and irreversible. He didn't even know what the future held for his own life, let alone the life of a child born from this strange union. What if the child was used as a weapon? What if it became a pawn in the political games of Earth or Xylos? What if it wasn't a bridge, but a catalyst for war between their species? Aaron? Tella's voice was soft, but it carried a note of tension, like she could sense the storm inside him. He turned from the window, finding both Tella and Naira standing just behind him. Their eyes, glowing faintly in the low light, reflected the same uncertainty he felt. He had become so used to their presence, their constant proximity, that it was difficult to imagine his life without them now. But that's what frightened him the most. How deeply they had already woven themselves into his life, into his very soul. He wasn't just deciding for himself anymore. "You're asking too much of me," Aaron said quietly, his voice strained. "This isn't just about a choice for you or your people. You're asking me to risk everything." Naira stepped forward, her expression soft but resolute. "We know it's asking more than anyone should have to give. But we also know that without you, Aaron, there's no future for us." "Then why me?" His voice cracked. "Why not someone else? Why am I the one who has to make this choice?" "Because you're the only one who can," Tella whispered, her voice full of emotion. "You're not just compatible genetically, Aaron. You're the only one we've met who shares this connection with us. We don't just want you because of your biology. We need you because of who you are." Aaron swallowed hard, feeling the walls closing in on him. He had spent his entire life feeling ordinary, like nothing he did really mattered in the grand scheme of things. But now, in this impossible situation, he was being told that he was at the center of something far bigger than he could comprehend. A decision that might shape the future of two species, and it rested solely on his shoulders. Naira's hand reached out, gently touching his arm. Her skin was cool against his, but the sensation sent a warmth through him that he couldn't deny. "We would never force you to do this, Aaron. You have to choose. We'll leave if you ask us to. But if you choose to help us, we'll make sure it's not just for survival. We'll make sure it's for something beautiful." Her words hung in the air, and for a long moment, Aaron said nothing. He turned his gaze back to the window, the city below a blur of lights and shadows. The future seemed just as hazy, just as uncertain. But somewhere in that haze, he could see the outlines of what Naira and Tella were offering, a chance to create something that had never existed before. Something new, something that could redefine what it meant to be human, to be Xylan. And then there was the bond. That connection between them, so powerful, so undeniable, that had grown stronger with each passing day. Aaron couldn't ignore the feelings that had taken root in him, feelings that had nothing to do with duty or responsibility. He had come to care for them, in a way that was beyond explanation, beyond logic. It was something that transcended their differences, their alien nature. It was real, but was it enough? Was that connection enough to justify the risk? The silence stretched out between them, thick with the weight of the decision he had to make. Aaron closed his eyes, trying to shut out the noise in his mind, to focus on what his heart was telling him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "If I choose to help you, if we go through with this, what happens next?" His voice was steady, but beneath it, the fear still lurked. Naira and Tella exchanged a look, something passing between them that Aaron couldn't quite read. When Naira turned back to him, her eyes were filled with both hope and sorrow. "We don't know," she admitted, her voice soft, "but we'll face it together, whatever comes." Aaron let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The uncertainty of it all still loomed large, but somehow, hearing that, knowing that they would face whatever came together, gave him a small flicker of courage. "I need more time," he whispered, though part of him knew there wasn't much time left. Tella nodded, her expression full of understanding. "We'll wait, Aaron. We'll wait for as long as you need." They turned to leave, their figures slipping back into the shadows of the penthouse. And as the door closed softly behind them, Aaron was left standing there, alone with the enormity of the choice he had to make. Two worlds, two futures, one impossible decision, and it was his to make. The mood in the city had changed, and Aaron could feel it with every step he took outside his penthouse. The streets were the same, the towering skyline as familiar as ever, but the people, they were different. Whispers followed him now, eyes lingering too long on his face as he passed by. Strangers exchanged glances, their expressions dark with suspicion. It was subtle at first, just murmurs and glances, but the tension had begun to build, simmering beneath the surface like a storm ready to break. News about Naira and Tella had spread far beyond the lottery circles. people were talking, and not in the way Aaron had hoped. They weren't curious anymore. They were afraid. Afraid of him. Afraid of them. He'd first noticed the change in the grocery store, a place he used to visit regularly without a second thought. As he picked up a loaf of bread, he caught sight of a woman staring at him, her eyes narrowing as if trying to figure him out. It wasn't a casual glance, it was something else. Something hostile. She whispered something to the man next to her, who immediately turned to look at Aaron, his mouth tightening into a thin line. Aaron had felt a chill run down his spine as he quickly left the store. It wasn't an isolated incident. On the streets, at the cafe where he used to meet friends, even in his building's lobby, people were whispering, judging. He was marked. Not just for being the lottery winner who had alien maids, but for what that represented. In the eyes of the public, he had become something else, someone who had crossed a line, a human who had allowed aliens to infiltrate his life, to get too close. It wasn't long before the whispers turned into something more dangerous. "They're manipulating you, Aaron," Zach had told him when they last spoke. His friend's voice was sharp, edged with the kind of certainty that frightened Aaron. "You don't see it, man, but I do. Those Xylans, there's something wrong with them. You need to get out before it's too late." But it was already too late. It started with the protesters, small groups at first, but growing in numbers each day. They gathered outside his building, waving signs that said things like "Earth for Earthlings" and "No Xylan breeding grounds." The words cut deep, each sign a reminder that the world wasn't ready for whatever it was he had stumbled into with Naira and Tella. They didn't understand the bond he shared with them. They couldn't understand. The protests escalated quickly. One night, Aaron came home to find the words "traitor" scrawled in red paint across the front of his building. As he stood there, staring at the hateful slur, the reality of the situation sank in. This wasn't just prejudice. This was turning into something far worse. Tensions between humans and Xylans had always existed, but now it was personal. For Aaron, it wasn't just nameless faces in a crowd. It was friends, neighbors, people he had known for years, turning against him, fueled by fear and misinformation. And that fear was spreading. Naira and Tella tried to remain calm, though he could see the strain in their eyes. They had never been fully accepted on Earth, not by most, but they had hoped. They had dreamed of a future where their mission would lead to understanding, cooperation between worlds. But now that dream felt more distant than ever. "You need to be careful," Naira had warned him one night, her voice soft but urgent as they watched the protesters from the balcony. "This isn't just about us anymore. They'll come for you too." "I can handle it," Aaron had replied, though even he didn't fully believe his own words. "They don't understand, once they know the truth. They won't care about the truth," Tella interrupted, her expression shadowed with worry. "They're too afraid, too angry." And she was right. The betrayal came from where Aaron least expected it. Zach, his closest friend, the person who had been by his side through everything, had turned against him. The message came late one night, a cold, clipped voice on the other end of the line. "I didn't want to do this, Aaron, but it's for your own good. You don't see it. They're controlling you." "What are you talking about?" Aaron's heart raced, dread curling in his stomach. "You don't understand, Zach. This isn't what you think it is." "I understand more than you do," Zach spat. "The government knows, Aaron. They've been watching you, watching them. They're dangerous, and if you won't stop it, they will." Aaron's blood ran cold as the line went dead. He felt the walls closing in. The government, they were coming for him. For Naira and Tella. He rushed to the living room, his heart pounding, every step heavier than the last. "Naira! Tella!" His voice echoed through the empty space, panic swelling in his chest. They appeared within moments, sensing his fear before he could even explain. Tella's eyes were wide, filled with the same terror that Aaron felt rising inside of him. "They know," he gasped, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Zach," he told them. "The government is coming. We have to get out of here." For a moment, the world stood still. Then, without hesitation, Naira grabbed Aaron's arm, her grip firm and urgent. "We need to leave, now." But as they moved toward the door, the sound of boots echoed through the hallway outside. A heavy knock came, loud and insistent. The door shuddered under the force. "Aaron Winters, open the door! This is the Earth Defense Authority." The betrayal was complete, and there was no turning back. Aaron's heart hammered in his chest as he stood frozen, the weight of the choice he had made, the choice between two worlds, crashing down around him. The world had never felt so quiet. The aftermath of the raid echoed in Aaron's mind like a broken record, the sound of boots, shouts, and the crackling of authority hanging in the air long after they had fled. But here, In the remote cabin, tucked deep into the woods, the silence was almost suffocating. Aaron sat by the window, watching the first light of dawn seep through the trees, the sky bleeding from black to deep purple. The weight of everything, of the choices he had made, the lives he had risked, and the uncertain future they now faced, pressed heavily on his chest. In the distance, he could hear the faint, rhythmic breathing of Naira and Tella, asleep in the next room, their forms curled together in a protective embrace. They hadn't left his side since the escape. He thought back to those frantic moments, how close they had come to being taken. Zach had betrayed him. The government had arrived too quickly, too prepared. But somehow, they had made it out. And now, they were in hiding, waiting for the world to catch up to the truth. The hybrid child was real. It was no longer a distant possibility or a theoretical discussion about the future. Tella was pregnant, and that reality, as impossible as it seemed, had already begun to change everything. Aaron's gaze drifted to the corner of the room where the small device Tella had used to monitor her pregnancy lay. It was something they had brought from Xylos, something advanced beyond human technology. According to Tella's readings, the hybrid child, their child, was developing faster than they had anticipated. Already, the embryo exhibited traits of both species, a perfect genetic blend of human and Xylan. This child was the future, the bridge between two worlds. And that terrified Aaron as much as it gave him hope. The soft creak of the floorboards behind him broke his thoughts. He turned to see Naira, her glowing eyes catching the first rays of sunlight, giving her an ethereal appearance. She moved silently toward him, sitting beside him at the window. For a long moment neither of them spoke, the silence between them filled with unspoken thoughts. "You haven't slept," Naira finally said, her voice barely a whisper. Aaron shook his head. "Couldn't. Too much on my mind." Naira reached out, her cool fingers brushing his arm. The gesture was simple, but it grounded him, a reminder that he wasn't alone in this. He never had been. "We've made it this far," she said, her eyes locking onto his. "Whatever happens next, we face it together." Aaron's throat tightened. He wanted to believe that, wanted to hold on to the idea that they could face whatever the world threw at them and come out on the other side unscathed. But the future was uncertain, and the world they had left behind was filled with fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of what their child represented. "They won't stop looking for us," Aaron murmured, his voice thick with the weight of that reality. "Not until they find out what this child means." Naira was silent for a moment, her gaze shifting to the horizon where the sun was slowly rising, casting the forest in a golden glow. "I know, but they won't understand, not yet. They'll see our child as a threat." Aaron's chest tightened. "What if they're right?" he asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. "What if this child, what if we, end up causing more harm than good?" Naira turned to him, her expression soft but resolute. "This child isn't a threat, Aaron. She's hope. The future isn't set in stone. It's something we create, something we shape, and together we can create something better." Aaron nodded, though the doubt still lingered in the back of his mind. But he wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that this child, this impossible union of two species, could be more than just a symbol of fear. That she could be the key to something new, something better for both worlds. Tella appeared in the doorway, her hand resting on the small swell of her belly. Her face was serene, but her eyes shone with the same determination that had carried them through the darkest moments. She crossed the room to stand beside them, her hand slipping into Aaron's, the three of them united in this quiet moment before the storm. "I felt her kick this morning," Tella said softly, her voice filled with awe. "She's strong." Aaron's heart swelled with a mix of emotions, fear, hope, love. He couldn't fully understand what this child would become, but he knew deep down that her existence was a miracle. The result of love, trust, and the bond they had built together. Suddenly, the quiet was broken by a soft beeping from Tella's device. She glanced at it, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. "What is it?" Aaron asked, his pulse quickening. Tella frowned, staring at the readings on the screen. "It's a signal. Someone's trying to find us." Aaron's blood ran cold. His first thought was the government, the Earth Defense Authority, hunting them down, ready to take them by force. But Tella shook her head, reading his thoughts. "It's not them," she said, her voice laced with surprise. "It's Xylos." Aaron blinked, confusion washing over him. "Xylos, I thought." "They've been looking for us," Naira explained, her eyes narrowing as she processed the information. "Our people, they didn't abandon us. They want to know what we've discovered." Tella met Aaron's gaze, her expression solemn. "They know about the child." Aaron's heart raced, the weight of the moment crashing down on him. This wasn't just about Earth anymore, it was about something far bigger. Both worlds, human and Xylan, were converging. And this child, their child, stood at the center of it all. "What do we do?" Aaron asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Naira squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with determination. "We face them, both worlds, together." As the first light of dawn spilled across the room, Aaron felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and challenges he couldn't yet imagine. But he wasn't alone. He had Naira, Tella, and the unborn child who represented a future neither human nor Xylan could have foreseen. It wasn't just the dawn of a new day. It was the dawn of something far greater. The future had arrived, and Aaron was ready to face it, together.